All right, now we are live.
Here we
We
go.
got the whole crew here back, another rendition of the B&H Virtual Event Space Expert Panel Edition. We got a new exciting release to talk about today, the Panasonic Lumix GH6. And not only did I bring along some intelligent friends here to talk about this new exciting gear today, I brought a replacement for myself, Mr. Frederick Johnson. I love having him on. He makes my job easy. So let's start it off with some intros. You got Matt Frazier from Panasonic, Frederick Van Johnson, Lumix ambassador, and the host and man behind the This Week in Photo podcast, and B&H's own Doug Guerra. We got him out of the classroom for today. If you guys haven't watched this video on this camera on YouTube, you will get the joke after you do. But Matt, you're no stranger, but for those who are not familiar with you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I am Matt Frazier. I work in business development for Panasonic Lumix, and I am going to be the least intelligent member of the panel today. So take that for what it's worth.
And I will snatch that crown from his hand when we are done here. But Frederick, what's going on, man? Glad to have you back. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, like you said, thanks for having me on. And I'm not gonna be offended by that. Hey, I have a bunch of intelligent people here, and Frederick is here also. That was all. Oh, I am, folks. If you don't know me, I'm the host of This Week in Photo. It's a podcast and community and all sorts of things for photographers. And I'm excited and honored to be on this panel to be chatting about this amazing new camera. So thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you on. And the man in the cardigan down there in my bottom left corner, Doug, what's going on, man? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey there. I'm Doug. I'm one of the producers and the hosts of the B&H YouTube channel. Had some time with the GH6 about a week ago. And I mean, I'm biased. I do love Panasonic, but it was genuinely fantastic to work with. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you on, have your input, all of you guys. You guys know how this starts. We're going to go over some of the specs here. We're going to get some of your experiential stuff from these guys. We want your questions. So a special welcome to everybody joining us from YouTube, live stream, Vimeo, Facebook. If you guys do have any questions at all, feel free to drop them in the comment section there. And if you're joining us on Zoom, they have that lovely Q&A module that makes it nice and easy for us. So don't hesitate, get your questions in. But we're going to get things started on the nerdy side. Matt, we want to see these specs. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so it's exclusively black and white and photos only. There's no other features in it.
Oh, wonder. Then we're done here. We're done. That's it.
It is a GH camera, so it leans in pretty heavy on the video side, but I want to make sure we talk about the photo side first. It is a 25 megapixel sensor, so it is at present the highest resolution sensor available in Micro Four Thirds. I realize there's some confusion when you go to more pixels. There's a belief that you get worse pixels because they get smaller. To offset a lot of that, we've incorporated a new technology called dynamic range boost. I'm not going to get too far into the details. Doug does a really good job in the video of explaining its benefit or how it works. But the benefit to you is that you get cleaner shadows and you get one full stop of dynamic range on the highlights. So you're getting more highlight information and cleaner shadows at the same time. This works for both photos and for video. I think that's important to note. So you're getting better image quality in both disciplines with the product. We've incorporated a 100 megapixel high resolution shot mode, which in a GH model camera, this is the first we've done that. And what's cool with it is you can actually do it handheld and it'll produce a 100 megapixel image in a very rapid sequence. And what's interesting is that a lot of the reviewers who we've seen who had time with the camera, they're really focused on this feature and are seeing really excellent results from this camera. In particular, the fact that it'll deal with motion really effectively. So there's been a lot of excitement around that. On the video side of things, the camera can do 5.7K video at up to 60 frames per second, which of the current cameras on the market in this class, that is the highest combination of resolution and frame rate that's currently available in this class of products. So there's a lot of processing power under the hood of the camera. It uses a CF Express card to be able to capture data. It can do 4K at up to 120 frames per second. It can do full high definition at up to 300 frames per second, which is frankly addictive to shoot. I was doing my daughter's volleyball games over the weekend with the camera, and the footage looks really, really good in full high definition. My personal favorite addition to the camera is internal ProRes. So the camera can record 5.7K ProRes at either 30 frames per second or 24 frames per second. And that's either in the HQ version, or it's also going to be in the standard version, both 422 10-bit. And then little nicety features that have been added, things like the ability to record 4-channel audio. So frankly, we could record all of us at the same time on this camera if we wanted to, and have each of us have independent level controls, things like that. The camera has a really flexible USB port initially for powering the camera, but there'll be a future firmware update which will allow you to take an external SSD and record files to that external SSD instead of having to use the internal memory with the camera. I could go on and on for hours, but let's just kind of end with the improvements to the stabilization system. We've upped the game from 6.5 stops on the GH5 Mark II to 7.5 stops, but that doesn't do a good job of telling the complete story. On the video side, it is just so much better at stabilizing video than where the GH5 Mark II or the S5 or the S1H sits today. And those cameras were really well received for quality stabilization. Honestly speaking, the GH6 makes them look kind of bad in comparison. It's that good. So I'll kind of leave it at that, and we'll hand it back over. And people would much rather listen to Doug or to Frederick than me talk. So let's move it on.
Come on. They love the specs. They love the specs. But Frederick, I do want to get now an experiential kind of, talking about what it's like using the camera. Matt unpacked everything lovely. But really just talk about your experience, anything that stood out to you.
Yeah. I just got my hands on this thing not too long ago. Here it is here. Look at that. Thank you, Matt Frazier, for sending over this demo sample for me to get hands on with. This camera, as I sort of step through it, looks like I'm looking for something wrong, right? So as a photographer, I've been shooting since 1989, right? So I'm looking at this camera, I'm like, what is missing from this camera from a still photographer or from a media producer, content creator standpoint? I wouldn't call myself a filmmaker, like all these numbers that Matt has in his head. Matt sees the world as the Matrix. I don't, right? When I look at this and I say, okay, what can I do with this, or what can't I do with it? And the answer is very little that's missing. If anything that's missing from this camera, I think Panasonic hit it out of the park on this. One thing I was looking at this articulated screen and just the origami effect of how this thing kind of operates, versus the other ones, very similar to the other ones. Powerful, right? And I haven't, after this call, literally when we hang up this call, I'm going out to shoot with this thing. But yeah, from a I'm putting this on my DJI gimbal. I'm going to walk around with this. This is going to be the camera for video. I cannot yet find anything physically wrong with this. I'm looking forward to putting Matt on the hot seat to ask some hard content creator podcaster questions. But yeah, I'm excited so far. No negatives yet.
I'm going to interrupt you, Frederick. So you said you're going to put on a gimbal, a DJI. Is it the RSC2 or the RS2 by chance?
The RS2.
So make sure you connect the USB cable to your camera, because we can actually do the tracking like what you would do with the Raven eyes, but it's all built into the camera, so you don't need to add the Raven eyes for it. It'll autofocus and track your subject just by using the face detection in the camera. So that's something we carried over from the S1H that's in the GH6.
Yeah, I do. I want to throw one question at Matt if I could. So Matt, when Panasonic kind of, was at the whiteboard and kind of conceptualizing what this camera was going to be and who it's for and all that, who was the avatar that they had in mind? Was it me? Was it the content creator that kind of has one foot in photography and one foot in video and doesn't want to compromise on either side? Or was it leaning more towards videographers or somewhere in there? Where was the line?
I think our goal was not to lose the subset of people who were existing GH owners, to make sure that we kept both feet in photo and video on the creator side, to make sure that it had the features that they wanted. And that's where like 300 frame per second, 240 frame per second, those features are really useful in that category. The high res shot mode, the better photo quality is all that side. But we wanted to broaden our tent of users. So we were heavily focused on making sure that we incorporated features that would make this a very good supplemental camera to like an Arri Alexa or a Vericam or a Sony Venice. We know that production workflow because of the Vericam, and we understand, we've really begun to understand where the potholes are in a camera design and when it will be selected for production and when it won't. What a lot of people don't realize is that just because the cinematographer has a preference for a camera system, ultimately post-production, more times than not, will be the deciding factor on which camera is selected. And so trusting the codec in their editing software becomes incredibly important to them. And a lot of people who are on this, this particular podcast are probably not using programs like Baselight for color grading, or have even heard of Baselight when it comes to color grading. And it's probably unlikely they're using an Avid suite or anything that's based in a Linux operating system. And so that ProRes functionality became really important. Having the ability to use the cinema style of file structure was very important to them, so that they would know, what camera was this, A, B, or C, which take is this. All of that information can now be communicated into the file structure. Time code was extremely important to post-production as well. And so a lot of effort was put into making sure that we were addressing the needs of post, so that in the pre-production phase, post would be excited to have this camera in the workflow and not upset that it's going to be in the workflow or trying to suggest alternatives to it. So, wow, that's a lot of words. We haven't even heard from Doug yet. So
we clearly got the right people on the panel today. I see. Doug's just sitting there. He's like, wait, can I log out yet? Do they need me here? I mean, Doug, you get your hands on a ton of gear, and different brands, different models, everything from pro to prosumer. So I always love having your opinion when we get a new piece of gear, because you can compare it to what's out there in the market, where many of us just stick to what we know. So what is it that impressed you about the GH6?
Oh, I mean, one of the standouts is definitely the ProRes internal recording. But I think what really impressed me just so much was the ways in which a lot of the core features that have been in this line for a while now have been improved to the point where it's really hard to find a place where the camera doesn't work for you. I think one of the toughest parts for the GH5 and Micro Four Thirds has been lower light, and the improvements to that have just been almost unbelievable. There are some shots that I have in the video that are going up to 6,400, 12,800. And it is obviously noisier, but it's much more usable. It's just so much more usable, and it's impressive to a point where you almost can't believe it. So that's literally why I'm saying it's unbelievable. And the DR boost has, I'm sure a good part to do with that. It goes for both video and photo, by the way. I do occasionally take out my GH5 for stills as well. And there are definitely moments in lower light situations where it's just not going to cut it. But this, I would definitely feel absolutely confident in it. So from that perspective, I guess comparing it to other options around, definitely at its price point, you're not going to get anything with that kind of video functionality. And it's not just quality, it's the tool set, it's the monitoring, it's the flexibility in recording options, it's the color science, it's the log options. And I love that it's full vlog now. It's when you talk about post, I mean, that's huge. I was able to, I know Panasonic has the like the 33 LUT pack that they have. And I've looked at that in reference to Vlog L, and it does work, but it doesn't look nearly as good as it now does on this camera. The Nicest 709 LUT, for example, which I grabbed right out of that pack, I just threw it on, did nothing to it, and it was so much more naturalistic to me, given the dynamic range of the camera and the cleanliness of the shadows and highlights. Now it's just completely different as opposed to the previous iteration.
And I noticed.
What did you think of the? Sorry,
Oh, no, go ahead, Matt.
What did you think of the highlight roll off with the GH6? Did you feel that there was a noticeable improvement in the highlights?
Way better. Yeah. No, it's definitely improved. The first shot I did actually was pretty much against like a window. Well, it was not against the window, but there was a bright overcast window in the background, and you know, you can tell it's blown out because that's what it is, but it was so much more diffuse and just pleasant to look at, and you could see just a bit of gray, not like pure white clipping. It was something that looked much more natural than it would with, I know, the GH5 and the previous iterations. And again, like I said, I did no actual corrections to it other than just putting the LUT on. So it wasn't like I was trying to pull back highlights. It wasn't like I was trying to reduce exposure in any way, nor did I do anything on set to, like gel the windows and ND them or anything like that. I did put a little fill light in there, but that's really about it. Yeah, we kept it pretty basic because I like to see how, camera responds to those natural highlights, natural shadows as much as possible without really overlighting it. Because if you want, of course, you can control the environment and light it, as much as you want, flag parts and control it. But if we're going to talk about what the camera can do in, I guess, realistic situations, or especially run and gun situations where you don't have that level of control, then it's really nice to see it like that.
I noticed you put it through the paces, Doug, and that's one thing I'd love to see when new gear is tested out, is not just taking it into home run situations and saying, you know what, we're gonna flag this, we're gonna light this as we would on set. And you mentioned it multiple times in your video that, these aren't the ideal conditions. We're gonna have to test it in better conditions, but that's when you want to see if it works.
Yeah.
When all the chips are down.
Wait. Not the ideal conditions. Going down a stairway at 120 frames per second into a total pitch black hallway with nothing but blue lighting. That's kind of a nightmare scenario.
He was trying to break you guys.
I don't regret it. But I do see how the flicker of the CRT televisions that were there could kind of maybe like throw people off as to what the sensor is capable of. But it's interesting how when I did the speed ramp on that, I guess the frame blending of it kind of solidified the refresh rate, and you could just see the scan lines going up on the TV. But it was I thought it was a neat effect, and I think anybody there knows in context, like this is what it does. They flicker. I thought it captured it great. The really cool thing to me was that even though obviously the stairwell and the TVs weren't exposed quite as much as I would like them to be, I didn't do any like iris writing or anything like that while I was doing that move. So it was the same exposure from that dimly lit stairwell to the TVs. So you get that crazy backlighting in the end, and you still get just a hair of shadow detail in that. And so, if you're looking to see just this completely uncontrolled demonstration of the dynamic range, there it is. The only thing I did was I color corrected white balance on the stairwell a little bit, and then just keyframe that into the original white balance that the TVs were shot against. So that was just to balance color, but the exposure is unchanged.
Now, I know, Matt, you touched on it briefly, and I do want to come back to it just a little bit. We get so involved in video, and everybody forgets that this is just as capable as a stills camera. So did have a question coming in about the still aspect of this camera and the specs on that. So if you could just rehash a little bit some of the call out points on this as a camera for stills.
So I will do that, but I also want to make sure we get to Desmond Richards' question, because honestly speaking, I'm not looking at the YouTube feed, but I am fairly certain his question is appearing multiple times in the YouTube feed. So let's just get it out of the way.
Let's jump on it. Let's jump on it.
So that it's answered, because it ties directly into the photo side as well. So it'll be helpful for both. So the question that is asked is, if you wanted more users, why not just change the autofocus system? So It's a very straightforward question. Very New York of you, actually. I appreciate that directness in the question. So let's go ahead and give you an answer. I'll be very straightforward. In order for us to give you a sensor in a micro four thirds camera that currently reads out at, as measured by a major publication, it reads out at 6.9 milliseconds at 120 frames per second, which is currently the fastest readout speed anybody's ever measured in a micro four thirds camera, which will give you less rolling shutter and also give you those high frame rates the camera's capable of achieving, and to deliver the dynamic range boost function, which gets you one full stop of highlight information and much cleaner shadows to address the challenges of a micro four thirds sensor, which is smaller, to give it an image that is very competitive and frankly, in my opinion, outperforms any crop sensor camera on the market right now. We weren't able to integrate a phase-based autofocus system. It was really that simple. These were the things we were able to put in. We couldn't put in the phase-based autofocus system. That's where we were at. That doesn't mean that at some point in time we won't consider phase or time of flight, or who knows, there might be something cool that our engineers are working on that they won't tell me because I would tell the world before it came out. But that's the situation we are in. We had to make a choice. Could we have bought an off-the-shelf solution that has similar specs at 120 frames per second with 20 megapixels and not move the image quality forward? Sure, we could have probably done an off-the-shelf solution like that, but we wanted to move the image quality forward. So that's why we did what we did. There are going to be people who will criticize that. I understand this, but we wanted to move that image quality forward, and we wanted to make sure that we were giving the most filmic looking image we could in a micro four thirds camera. So on the photo side, obviously this impacts the autofocus system for photography. So I have a daughter who's in volleyball. I got a son who plays high school basketball, and I've been shooting the GH6 for their sporting events for the past month. It is clearly the best autofocus for photography we have ever produced. I will not call the GH6 a sports photography camera because it's for autofocus, you're at about 8 frames per second, which like a decade ago, that would have been great. Today, it's not very good in terms of sports burst rates. But you have the extra dynamic range from the dynamic range boost. You have that terrific low grain image from the dynamic range boost in the mid-tones and shadow regions. And you have 25 megapixels to work with. So for portrait work, for wedding photography, for landscape work, I even think for a lot of wildlife work, you're getting an excellent camera system for that. And if you do things like structural, architectural, or landscape photography, that 100 megapixel high-res shot mode is legit. It is absolutely fantastic. And it is the benefits of shooting in high-res shot mode go well beyond just the sharper image from 100 megapixels. You have to understand there's a lot of magic that's going on behind the scenes. We say it's 8 images that it's taking and assembling into a 100 megapixel shot. That's when it's on a tripod. When you're hand holding it, it's taking something closer to 16 images and stitching all of that together. And the noise is dramatically reduced. So for night architectural work, it's going to be one of the cleanest images that's going to maintain the best color fidelity you've probably ever seen in a camera. All for the extra pain of holding it for a fraction of a second longer so it can execute all of those 16 images. But we couldn't do that handheld high-res shot without this sensor and its ability to read out so quickly. We couldn't do it without this massive improvement in the image stabilization system. So is it going to appeal to every photographer? No. Can I use it for my kids' sports photography? Yeah, I can use it, but I'm not making a living taking photos of professional sports teams or college sports teams. I'm doing this for recreational photography or for family-based photography. And for a lot of the sports my kids play, the 60 frame per second burst that it offers works extremely well for what they're doing. In volleyball, the jump is vertical. I'm usually perpendicular to my subject, and then they're moving perpendicular to the well, I guess perpendicular or parallel, it depends on your perspective, really. But my subject's moving perpendicular to the lens, which makes it very easy for me to use the 60 frame per second burst for the stuff that I shoot. Ultimately, the images look phenomenal photographically. And so I won't probably pick up an S-series camera this year. I probably won't use a full frame camera this year. I will probably use the GH6 for everything I'm doing with my kids' sports. When I do senior pictures this coming year, which I did my kids' senior pictures on a GH5 Mark II, I did his friends on a GH5 Mark II. Everything I'll probably do is on a GH camera this year, and it'll probably be the GH6. The images are that good.
Frederick, he just said he's ready for whatever question you want to. He heard you earlier, loud and clear. He came prepared today.
Yeah, I've got a list. But you know, I know Matt Frazier. I've known him for many years. I know he can answer every single one of these questions. First one, Matt, I want to dive in a little bit on the dynamic boost mode and have you explain what's happening internally there and why it's so amazing. Because from what I've read, it's a kind of magic in there.
It's a magic, but I wouldn't say it's like something new in this industry. So Arri with the Alexa, one of the things that makes the Arri image look the way it does is the fact that they're reading the sensor's information and they're sending it to two gain stages. There's one that is focused on the highlight area. So it's a low gain. We're not using a lot of amplification basically. So you take the image off the diode, you send it to two amplifiers. One that's going to focus on a low gain signal, which is going to give you all that beautiful highlight information and the latitude and the highlights. And then there's another one that's got a lot of gain. It's got a ton of gain. And then it's just clipping the highlights like nobody's business. It's like, 6 stops or something ridiculous like that. But that means your shadows
are identical, right? These are at that point in the pathway. It's the single frame. It's not linear. It's simultaneous. This is happening.
Yeah, this isn't like an HDR for photography where you have frame 1 and frame 2, and then you're combining the two and you're hoping the subject didn't move between those frames. This is the first frame in the sequence, for example. It's one frame that's brought in, and it's going to be gained in 2 different levels. One that's got a lot of gain, which is going to clip the highlights like crazy, but the shadows are going to be really clean. They're going to be boosted in level. They're going to be brighter in intensity. Then you have all that highlight information, and you have really dark shadows in the other amplification, and those shadows are a noisy mess. And then you're going to bring them into a processor, and you effectively set a threshold. You say, any pixel that's below this saturation point, that's at this lower level of photons that hit the diode, we're going to use the high gain. And anything that's above this threshold, we're going to use the low gain. And that's all brought in, and then it's processed and it's brought out as a raw file. It comes out for photography as a 16-bit image. You're effectively getting a 16-bit photo file. It's in a 16-bit container. That's what's required to hold the dynamic range of the GH6, which again, we haven't mentioned this before. We literally just got approval last night to say this. I don't know of another Micro Four Thirds camera that's delivering you 16-bit raw photo files. They're huge. I mean, my raw photo files are 44 mega file, which is bigger than an S1R's files, which is a 47 megapixel camera. But you're getting that kind of information out of it. And there's other companies that have an interesting take on this. Canon does something called DGO, which is a dual gain architecture, and they're using split diode array to do this. But it's all delivering the same basic concept here. The difference is it's always been on the cinema side because it's a very expensive technology to integrate. It's a lot that has to go into the design. This is the first time you're getting this in some sort of a consumer affordable camera. Everything that's done this before has been in the $7,000 range up to $100,000+ in some of the Arri products. So that's what I think is so exciting, is you're getting this level of image quality in a really compact camera that produces just stunning images and has lenses. It's like 40 or 50 lenses in the Micro Four Thirds ecosystem that cover everything from the smallest, lightest weight 15 millimeter you'll probably ever shoot with in your life, all the way up to lenses that give you full frame look in a 25 to 50 and a 10 to 25 f1.7 constant that have no lens breathing. So if you're doing focus stacking or if you're using it for video production, no matter where you focus it, it just has a nice smooth, it just pulls focus. It doesn't change the angle of view. They have a parfocal behavior. So you can literally set your focus once and zoom in and out, and it's always going to stay in focus for you. We put a lot of attention to detail in these things so that it can service, both populations of users from the photo side or the video side.
Yeah. And how does that just from a in the trenches standpoint with dynamic boost on the photography side? So basically, we're getting as the name says, dynamic boost. So we're getting much more dynamic range. We're able to go into situations and pull out usable images where we couldn't before because we were limited by low light sensitivity or clipping highlights, et cetera. That's where we're going. We have more superpowers as a photographer, correct?
Right. And I think there's, on the photo side, the system's fully automated. There's like certain ISOs we don't use it in because it doesn't perform quite as well. There's certain ISOs we do use it in. I can't wait for Photons to Photos to do a test of this thing because it's probably going to look a stair step instead of like this like smooth curve because of the way that it handles dynamic range and highlight information. I think there's two pieces to this though, Frederick. So there's on the one side you get cleaner shadows, right?
Yeah.
On the other side though, I can shoot hotter because I've got more highlight information to work with. So if I want even cleaner shadows, I can overexpose. And I know I've got more highlight information. So then I can pull down and that gets us even further cleaner shadow information. So you have more, I mean, it's the reasons why people want to shoot full frame cameras, right? You have more highlight information that you can bring down, or you can choose to shoot hotter, and that's going to give you brighter shadow information. It's all the reasons that people want to shoot full frame cameras. It may not be quite to the level of a full frame camera in terms of what it can absolutely deliver, but darned if it doesn't split the difference pretty effectively. And I haven't seen an APS-C sensor that has the flexibility of the sensor and delivers what it can deliver. And so that's why I think you have to look at this as sort of like the king of crop sensor cameras, because that's really where I think its place is. And again, if image quality is what you care about, this delivers it in spades. And that's what I think it makes it such a terrific photo camera. And people will forget about that because it does ProRes RAW and it does 300 frames per second. And you can bring time code into it. And you could absolutely, shoot this thing without a gimbal and you're going to get really good stabilization out of it at the same time. It's such a flexible tool. There's so many things that it can do. I think sometimes the photo side of it gets lost in the shuffle a bit.
And on that gimbal, the image stabilization side of things, the mechanism, the actual hardware that enables that has been changed, right? That's different in this camera body versus previous GH camera bodies. What changed?
Well, before we get that, Doug, you've had a chance to work with it. What did you think of the stabilization and what we've done to it? Have you noticed an improvement, or is it like it's GH6? It's just GH5.
Well, it's the only reason I would be dismissive is if I had the expectation, and I did. But no, I mean it was phenomenal. I thought the GH5 was already really good with stabilization, and so the GH6 has obviously improved upon that. In my experience, I think I went as far as 100 millimeter. So it wasn't as far as I probably should have tested it. I would really like to try it, with something like a 200, 400, something like that. But I was able to completely handheld hold a pretty steady shot, close up on somebody's face and then down on like an insert shot, somebody writing. And it was steady. I mean, the only thing I would have to say, and this is just true with any stabilization system that I've seen so far, is it occasionally will fight you if you have an intentional movement. I was doing a tilt down, and it fought me a little bit in doing that, but it was, I think that's obviously just it working. It's doing its job. But other than that, it was like magic. And in truly handheld situations, if you're actually like really moving around, that's where I think it shines the most. We did two different moves, the stairway into the TV thing, which you saw. That was technically assisted by a rig, but we did a completely handheld one where I traveled from a desk to another desk, and I'm moving not just horizontally or vertically. I'm doing like a whole, I guess I'm moving in Z space, you would say. And the autofocus kept up, which is good. But the stabilization held up really nicely. It looked obviously handheld, but not distractingly so. And it was not, I never really lost the subject in the frame, that much at all. It was definitely more smooth than the GH5 for sure. And it's just, like I said, the only reason I would be dismissive is if I had expected it to be that good. And yeah, it only didn't surprise me because I had a feeling it would be like that.
And just so everybody
yeah.
knows, if you haven't seen Doug's piece, he reenacted 90210 where he had 30-year-olds acting like high school students. So
They do that on TV still.
I know, but it's he's a very young guy. Anyways, the shot itself that you're talking about, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I think what catches people by surprise with the stabilization is that not only can you hold it still, but when you're doing a walking shot, there's a lot less rocking in it than there's been in the past system that we used. But what we did technically to get that out of the way, we just put one heck of a nice gyro sensor in the camera. We were using a much higher precision gyro sensor in the camera, and that gives us more accurate data as to what you're doing with the camera. And then we just throw horsepower at it. So you're throwing processing power at the system to resolve whatever's left over. I'll give some friendly advice on the stabilization based on my work with it. We have a lot of people who are looking for like this absolute like stabilized monster, like it's, like on a lead-based tripod kind of look to it. And so they like to use like the Boost IS, and they like to use the electronic image stabilization. And those things really fight against you if you're trying to do like camera pans, or you're trying to do, intricate camera moves. You're going to get the best result if you're moving the camera at all to just use just the BIS on its own or the dual IS on its own. Don't apply any of the other additional features to it, because I think that actually hurts the image more than it helps it. So for camera moves, I always just only use that. And then something I don't know how many people on this podcast are familiar with the anamorphic lenses, but anamorphic lenses are, that's why J.J. Abrams is who he is, right? That's why he gets the horizontal lens flares and everything. But those lenses squeeze and they stretch everything. And then we de-squeeze them in post. And that's where you get the cool lens flares. You get the funky bokeh in the background. And the GH cameras have probably the most complete set of features. Clearly in mirrorless, they have the most complete set of features. It's not even fair. But even among cinema cameras, they have a much more complete feature set for anamorphic lenses because they can stabilize anamorphic lenses. And it requires a very different technique of stabilizing when we're working with anamorphic lenses. And so we actually build in optimizations for all the different anamorphic lenses that you'd ever use. So, and those are things that are improved on the GH6 as well.
Matt, can we stay with lenses for a second? Because I did see a couple questions pop up regarding functionality, lens options. We had Jeff asking about lens options on YouTube, and Ron, who's joining us on Zoom, is asking if the GH6 preserves the functionality of the Olympus Micro Four Thirds Pro lenses.
I guess it depends on what functionality we're talking about in the Olympus Pro lenses. Olympus, as of today, I think have like 3 lenses that have in-lens stabilization. I think it's 3. They recently announced a couple of new lenses. I don't know if those have in-lens stabilization, so you have to forgive me. I've been a little obsessed with GH6. I haven't been able to keep following up on everything Olympus is doing. So we won't be able to use dual IS, or what they call sync IS, with our body and their lenses. There's still some competition between Olympus and Panasonic, and we want to keep certain technologies our own. But outside of that, we can control the focus in their lenses just fine. All of the lens data is communicated and embedded in the metadata of the camera from the Olympus cameras. This is particularly important for the stabilization because it will communicate its focal length. And I'll say this for Olympus: they communicate their focal lengths at the millimeter level. I've adapted competitors' lenses and non-micro four thirds in different mounts, and some mounts don't even communicate focal length at all. So I don't even know how they make their stabilization work. Others communicate the focal length, but they only communicate it at the same marks that are on the lens. So when you're zooming, whatever they have for the markers on the lens is the only focal lengths that they're communicating, which makes it harder to stabilize them because there could be like a 15 millimeter, about a 14 millimeter difference between what the lens last reported and what the focal length actually is. So with those Olympus lenses, they really stabilize well on our camera because they communicate their focal length information very well. So really the only thing you lose is sync IS. I would say that you probably lose more going from Panasonic to an Olympus body on lenses because we have done something called declicking our iris. So when you turn the aperture ring on our lenses, well, any of our lenses that have an aperture ring, they don't work with the Olympus. You have to use the wheel on the Olympus camera. I don't believe there's anything we're doing to prevent Olympus from doing that. I just think it's, they've had their hands full with other things. I'm sure that they'll eventually add that functionality. And then with the declicked iris, again, you would have to use the control on your Olympus. And I think they're only giving you thirds of a stop of control instead of it being completely declicked. So you definitely get more you probably lose more functionality with a Panasonic lens going to Olympus than you would lose an Olympus lens coming to Panasonic.
Okay.
I think that's about the best answer I can give. And then in terms of options and other things like that, it's Micro Four Thirds. It's been around forever now. At this point, almost 15 years old. It'd probably be easier to tell you what lenses we don't make. You know, we're not making like like the tilt shift lenses in our mount. That's about it, really. I mean, we cover from extremely wide lenses like a 7mm, and keep in mind that with Olympus you have options too. Olympus makes a 7. They make a 7 to 14, which is the equivalent of a 14 to 28. Theirs is an f2.8, ours is an f4. We make an 8 to 18 that I'm particularly fond of because it actually has filter threads, so it's easy to put on ND filters or anything you need to polarize, anything you need to do with that. And that's an f4 to an f2.8 to f4. That's a Leica-based lens. We have multiple 12 to 42s. We have multiple 12 to 60s. We've got a 12 to 35 f2.8. We've got a 10 to 25 f2.8. We've got a 35 to 100 f2.8. A 10 to 25 f1.7. We've got a 25 to 50 f1.7. We got a 200 millimeter f2.8 lens with a 1.4 teleconverter. We make a 100 to 400, and then you have all the other options from Olympus as well. It's a ton of lenses. But then on top of that, when it comes to third-party lenses, I still think Micro Four Thirds has like the deepest amount of lenses available and some really funky stuff. Like Voigtlander does 0.95 lenses in a whole series that starts, I think, as small as like 12 millimeters, as wide as 12 millimeters up to like, they go to 100 millimeters in that series, and they got like 7 lenses in it. And then there's multiple knockoffs of the Voigtlanders that are also 0.95s, and there's 0.85s. Where I think Micro Four Thirds sings the most, though, is that you have a ton of anamorphic budget lenses available. And I'm talking like really, really budget stuff, like, under $800 for an anamorphic lens and like a 133 anamorphic. You've got the, Vazen series of anamorphics, which are exceptionally good at, 1.8 squeeze anamorphics. If you want to play with anamorphic, there's no better system to start on than Micro Four Thirds because it's the only affordable system for shooting anamorphic. So that's just like a small quantity of the lenses that are out there, not including like all the cinema lenses that offer Micro Four Thirds mount that can be used on our system as well without even having to change over to an adapted system. So.
Wow.
So let me wake up Frederick. I know I just put him to sleep there. Just shake him up. Get him awake.
This is numbers, all that's, where's the photography? No, no, one of the things that popped out in my notes I wanted to chat with you about, all you guys, is the Venus engine and the enhancements to the Venus engine. So I know that it's better in GH6, but I don't know how it's better. Is it just a faster processor, or is it some other magic in there, Matt?
Well, there's the processing power obviously is gone. It's twice as powerful. But now it's how are we dedicating that processing power? So a lot of that's going to the autofocus system. So the autofocus system has 3 times the processing power of the S1H. It's an example. And then there's a lot of deep learning algorithms that have been applied, which is what you're doing to help improve the autofocus system further, recognizing subjects, human bodies, faces, eyes, heads, animals, so that you can keep that tracking. We've completely redone the noise reduction algorithms in the camera for both photography and for video. So the noise reduction is much improved over the previous generation stuff we're using the S1H, not only in getting rid of noise, but maintaining sharpness and detail. We didn't put an anti-aliasing filter on the camera. This gets into the nerdy stuff that I know Frederick doesn't enjoy talking about, but
I love nerdy stuff. Come on.
This like subtly softens the image as it's coming in. And the byproduct is you don't have a sharpened image, but then you don't have to deal as much with what's called moire or aliasing. We are not putting that filter on, and we're doing a lot of processing to deal with it. And the initial results from the tests I've seen online, people are really impressed with how low the instances of aliasing and moire are on the GH6. The GH5 had a good reputation for not having aliasing or moire, so it's not like we had a problem with this, and the GH5 didn't have an anti-aliasing filter either. But going to the higher resolution and then this new processing that we have, it's substantially better. So that's just kind of a glimpse into it. And then, just like the IO ports, right? Like the input and output ports, HDMI port can now support HDMI 2.1, which means you can eventually do 4K at 120 frames per second over HDMI. We didn't do that at the launch, by the way, because there are no recorders that can take advantage of that right now. It seemed like a waste of engineering resources to give you a feature you can't use yet. So we'll wait until someone says, hey, we're about to release this. Can you make sure it works on your camera so we can test it? And then we'll start working to make sure it works. So that's engine based. The USB ports now all based in the engine system. Latency is reduced as long as people test it correctly, which I've noticed a couple of people haven't really been testing the HDMI port as effectively as they could. Turn the sound off on the HDMI out, and it cuts the latency in half. So anybody out there who's using external monitors, just turn the audio off on the HDMI port. It'll cut your latency in half, and we'll continue to work to even further reduce that. I'm sure you'll see a firmware update at some point to improve that.
Can we talk about color science? I know we had a question from Lyndon that came in on Facebook, talking about the colors, particularly in skin tones in the full frames versus the micro four thirds. So he was asking if this color science matches the skin tones on the full frame Panasonics.
Match is a tough one to give because we're always improving color science. I really like the skin tones on the GH6. I probably prefer them a little bit actually to where like the S5 is for skin tone. But I think it's just the refinement of the color that's there. It's real subtle, the difference between this and like the S5. I think, Doug, you obviously have been shooting the camera for quite a bit now.
I wanted to chime in on that actually, because that was literally the very first thing that stood out to me. Like I said, I just applied the nicest 709 LUT, and I noticed the skin tones were incredible. Markedly so over GH5. And I really didn't think the GH5's skin tones were that bad. There were some shots where I'd have to massage it from, time to time, but seeing how easily and just how quickly they were like locked into place in a really nice way. It was really nice to see. I don't know if it's a match. Match is obviously hard to know without looking at things really metrically, but it did remind me at least of, I guess, the S1H and S1 tones a bit. So I haven't done a comparison to really state that with any authority, but one thing that I've always noticed about Panasonic cameras is the reds are always very clearly delineated. They slightly skew, and I mean this in a good way, but slightly more magenta than orange, which I like personally. And there's a shot I have in the video where I'm looking at like a shelves with books, and there's like a bust on it, and the color of the wood is this very particular like shade of red, and I just love the way it renders out. Compared that with the skin as well, you could see just the different tones that are in the face. It doesn't look homogenized into this, like orange or yellow or green, but it also doesn't look, like blotchy, if that makes sense. So I was very impressed with that. I really like the skin tones on this camera. Image quality improvements are definitely, I think, the strongest. From the color to the sharpness, the noise, everything. The image quality improvements cannot be overstated enough.
Well, and we got a lot of samples out. There's a lot of people who shot some content with this, and if you want to see some strong sort of skin tone things, whether you go to Potato Jet's channel, I think he's done a really good job of comparing the skin tones, or if you head to Armando Ferreri's channel, he did a lot of sort of comparisons. There's Matty Hapoya, his channel did something really interesting with skin tones. I think probably the most direct comparison I saw was what Tony and Chelsea Northrup did on their channel. They shot directly against the competitor. I'm not going to name it here because it's tacky, but the skin tones were phenomenal in every one of these results. So I think that's probably the thing that's coming the most clear through. And even, like Caleb Pike, he's commented on how awesome the skin tones look. So, I'll tell the biggest dad joke ever from a manufacturer's rep. How can you tell any manufacturer's rep's lying to you? Because my lips are moving. The best thing for you to do is to make sure that you kind of look at the skin tones from multiple people and what they've shown. It's important to note the detail of this camera, because the sensor is capable of reading out 5.7K at 120 frames per second. That is what the sensor is reading out. And so when you look at those 4K 120 files, they look phenomenally detailed. They're incredibly sharp. There's a lot of detail there. The 5.7K 60p, really, really sharp, lots of detail. And that means when I downsample that to a 4K or a 1080 deliverable, that any noise that was there is very, very small in the final deliverable. And all of that helps to contribute to even better color fidelity. When you're downsampling from 5.7 down, it just delivers a beautiful looking image. I'm not going to make apologies for the GH6's image quality. It is absolutely the best Micro Four Thirds image out there. I'm not going to make any apologies for that. It is awesome.
You had mentioned earlier actually about the still image quality as well, and that it kind of bites into that. One of the reasons to use full frame. And I actually was thinking the same thing, because when I opened up some of the stills, just the regular 25 megapixel, not the 100, the noise level was so well maintained. And, I'm talking up to probably 1600, 3200, something like that. Because I left it auto ISO. I wanted to just see, like, what is it going to throw me? And it looked so surprisingly clean and so surprisingly detailed. The reworking of those algorithms, I didn't go into the RAWs. I couldn't, because it's brand new. So I only saw JPEGs, and they look great. So yeah, image quality wise, this really delivers more than I think people probably would expect.
I would agree. So there's a couple of questions I've seen popped up, if you don't mind me asking.
Yeah.
Someone's asking why ISO 2000 for vlog. Hey, why not? No, the truth is that's only if you use DR boost, which I would argue you probably should use DR boost to just ND down, because it does provide more highlight information. But you can absolutely turn the DR boost off, and you can get all the way down to ISO 250, which is, I think, the lowest ISO we've ever offered for vlog in any of our cameras. So and that's not like an extended ISO. You are getting very good images there. It's just not going to have the dynamic range of the DR boost function, but you can absolutely turn it off and get to ISO 250. There's another question I saw in here that I just wanted to get to really quick. 7.5 stop stabilization, is that just in body, or is that with Panasonic lenses? That answer is yes. It just depends on the focal length. Panasonic is, I think, unique in this. We actually tell you the focal lengths that you'll get the stabilization to 7.5 stops. Pretty much any lens that goes from about 7 millimeters out to 60 millimeters. That's the equivalent of 120 in a full frame. The in-body stabilization will give you 7.5 stops. Then when we get beyond 60 to somewhere about 140 millimeters, we would need the in-lens stabilization in combination with the in-body. So those two things together would give you 7.5 stops. So effectively, if you have an in-lens stabilization system or an OIS lens, you can go from 7 millimeters to 140 millimeters, and you'll have 7.5 stops. And there's a crossover point where from 60 down, you don't need the in-lens system.
Matt, there was a question in here that I wanted to get to regarding we always forget about the inputs, outputs, the capabilities of of those. So I'm searching through the weeds here to see if we can get it. Oh, so Sight Unseen Virtual Events. Shout out to them joining us from YouTube. Let's talk about the USB-C. Can you download files off the camera via that connector and power the camera at the same time?
I haven't tested that, to be honest with you.
Download and power?
Download
Yeah,
and
so
power.
yeah. I'll have to test that, to be honest with you.
I will let you in on something that I accidentally did. I left the camera on for over 24 hours connected to a computer. I guess it's powered, but
yeah, I know it will power. It'll absolutely power over a computer as long as you have USB-C with PD with power delivery functionality. We can absolutely power. The question is, while a data file is transferring it, will it simultaneously maintain power? I think that's the question that's being asked. Some of this I don't know, because there's certain things we're working on to be able to add the external hard drive, or the SSDs for it. So there's some things that have to still be worked out on that side. Honestly, I have a camera here. And I mean, if you want to give me a minute, I can plug it in and see really quick.
There we go. Hey, we'll let Matt take a quick look at it. Frederick, I think you got some show and tell stuff for us to
no, I do not.
You don't have anything over there? Oh, I thought you had.
No, I literally just got this little baby in my hand about 24 hours ago. So
he got FedExed.
I got FedExed. I got FredEx.
Yeah, actually, he got pandemic. We've been working with FedEx for years.
Let's see. Is there anything on the body? Anything that's different? How does it stack up?
Yeah, for me, there's nothing that I'm wanting for yet. So I will be posting something after I get my initial reviews on this. But yeah, right now I'm in that nerdy sort of, look at this amazing new shiny precious I have in my possession, and let me check out some potato jet videos and all these guys to make sure I understand before I take it out into San Francisco. But one question that did pop up was, as I look at this camera, the GH6, and the other cameras in the Panasonic line from the S series and the other GH bodies like GH5 Mark II, where, Matt, maybe this is directly at you. If someone walks into a camera store, I'm walking into Mike's Camera in Sacramento, right? And I'm a new person. I'm new to photography. I know I want to buy Panasonic. How do I know which one to buy? Like in other words, we know GH6 it has superpowers for videographers, and it's a highly capable still photography camera. So that's probably where I would lean if I'm going to be a YouTuber or something like that, right? But the other ones in the lineup, you happen to be in the store and they're like, oh, hey, I got a couple of grand and I want to buy a nice camera and I want to do photography and video. Where would you guide them at this point with GH6 on the scene right now?
I think first I would probably recommend, because the guys at B&H have basically done reviews on almost every camera that we've launched in the past like 6 or 7 years. So I would first probably direct them to check out a Doug video and see what his thoughts are on each of the cameras. So we direct them.
We'll talk to Doug at B&H, go in.
Yeah. And so I think one thing to do is to kind of sort of see what experts are saying about the camera and see how it's going to fit your needs. When we look at the overall picture of the cameras and how I break them down, we have cameras like the G7 and the G95 and G85, which all are 4K cameras. And it's going to come down to, do I want in-body stabilization or do I want to save some money? The G7 doesn't have in-body stabilization. The G85 and the G95 in-body stabilization. They're in mirrorless camera, SLR style form factors, and they have microphone jacks on all of those cameras. So for me, you have to have a mic jack if you're going to do anything video related. So those are the first sort of entry into these cameras. If you don't have a mic jack, it's just not going to work for most of the entry point users who are on the market looking for a camera. Once we get past a G85 or G95, we're then looking at like a G9, again, to have a microphone jack. So it's big for me to have a microphone jack. And that's where we get into 10-bit video. That just means you have more latitude in post. So if I need to bring highlight information back, I need to lift shadows, and I want to mess with the colors, I have more room to work with those cameras when I have that 10-bit file. And so cameras like the G9 give us that capability. And then when you go to a GH5 Mark II, the GH5 Mark II is a 10-bit camera that has no time limit recording. And for a budding filmmaker on a budget, the GH5 Mark II is a brilliant camera because it's really the only mirrorless camera that can speak the language of the cinematographer, speak the language of a video shooter, or speak the language of a DSLR, photographer shooter. So we have the ability to customize the menu so that it speaks in film terms like shutter angle instead of shutter speed. We can change the ISO to be gain. So if your aspirations are live event video production, we can set this up for gain, which is what production cameras that do broadcast work in. And so as somebody who's trying to learn this stuff for school, it can get really confusing when, in class you're learning on like a red or you're working on like a broadcast video camera. And then you go home to try to reenact some of this stuff and your camera speaks in ISO and shutter speed, and that's not what the other cameras are doing. So you can literally get familiar with how the filmmaking process is, and you get those tools like waveform monitor and vector scope. And so I look at the GH5 Mark II as the budget entry for somebody who really wants to learn cinematography, or they want to learn video production, or somebody who is trying to supplement those products, or a YouTuber who wants a more serious and faster workflow. My biggest frustration with my competitors' cameras is the lack of shutter angle. That's my biggest frustration, because if you shoot video, you're changing frame rates all the time because you want to do slow-mo and then you want to go back to 24 frame for the interview process. Your B-roll is going to be at like 60 frames or 120 frames. And so I'm constantly having to remember to change my shutter speed every single time, which is crazy to me. I'd rather just set it to 180 degrees and I don't have to think about it again. I used to think that I wanted 180 degree because I'm a pretentious cinematographer, but the truth is I want it because I'm a lazy video shooter and it just makes life easier for me.
I can relate.
And so I think the GH5 makes that easy. The GH5 Mark II makes that easy. And then if you want just the absolute most features in a camera in the G series, that's where the GH6 comes from. And if you want the absolute best image in the G series, that's where that camera really lives. And I still think it's a phenomenal value at $2,200. But honestly speaking, not everybody has $2,200 to spend on a camera. And the GH5 Mark II is a brilliant tool for, I think it's like $1,500 right now on B&H.
Well, I do want to get to one last thing because I did see a couple questions pop up about the streaming capabilities. So I wanted to touch upon that before we get this hour of fun wrapped up.
So we'll touch base on that, and I'm going to ask Sean McLeod's last question, and we'll wrap it with this.
We got it. We got to finish with that one. That's a great one there. It's a loaded question. So who wants to jump on the streaming?
I'll jump on the streaming because. Yeah, sorry, Doug. You don't know what our future holds, which is
I don't.
Maybe he does.
The GH5 Mark II would be the most complete streaming camera in our line because you can actually control it through our smartphone app, and you can do direct streaming to platforms like YouTube and Facebook Live and anything that does RTMP. And none of that stuff is in the GH6. And nobody knows what the future holds for that. Well, maybe one of us does, and I can't talk about it. But nonetheless, that's a GH5 Mark II feature set. We have not incorporated that into the GH6. However, you have live HDMI outputs. You can use a capture card. You can use the USB port on the camera, and you can use our webcam app. So you can use it, and it behaves just like a webcam on your computer, which is a nice way to do it. Or you can use the Lumix tether app, and then through OBS, you can grab a frame, basically just do a window under the image. And then this last question, I think I want Doug to answer this question, and then
there we go.
Maybe Frederick can chime in. So, Doug, can you make a good movie with a camera under $1,200?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first off, and this is going to sound weird to say, but gear doesn't matter if you're talking about a good movie. Plenty of movies have been shot that don't look great. I would even argue, and this is like film school stuff, but sound is probably more important. Professional sounding sound is probably more important to the quality of a perceived quality of a good movie. And if I'm gonna do name drops here with Panasonic, Upstream Color was shot on a GH2, and at that time I don't know what it was going for. But yeah, I mean, you can absolutely shoot. I would say the only real tricky part about this is that I think when people do look at price ranges like that, is that they don't necessarily think of all the other things that go into that. Obviously the lenses, you know, you have really, if you have limited budget, I always tell people put some of it into lighting, because you're going to want to take care of that and have some intentionality with that. But you know, that's a whole nother conversation. Yes, the short answer is yes. You can absolutely do it for under 1,200. But you do have to be mindful of certain limitations. And you just have to know that it's not just the camera. You know, can you, in theory, get a fixed lens camera? Sure, you could do that too. And I will honestly say, if you have a script that can stand up to that, go for it. And I don't think anybody's gonna knock you for it. Do try to invest in sound if you can, because that'll probably have some effect on, again, the perception of the, I guess, the ambition and the budget behind the movie. But yeah, under 1,200, absolutely. It's
We're
just,
gonna be
Just remember,
smart about it.
we're gonna be screening Doug's $1,100 camera movie in the
think-
fall.
The challenge.
I think the key, honestly, I think the key here is your story is ultimately what's going to drive a picture. And
Yeah.
what you do with your cinematography needs to match the story that you're trying to tell. And you can use any camera to match that story. And one final point, yes, you can absolutely make a film that's a great picture on a $1,200 camera. You can also make a horrific picture on a $100,000 camera. So it is not camera related. It's ultimately your creativity and what you want to deliver and your amount of effort and energy you're willing to put into the project.
Fraser dropping gems today. And here I had the Matt Fraser sign ready. We didn't really need it today.
Yeah, jokes.
You came with gems today and not dad jokes. Wow.
Yeah, I must have wasted them all at volleyball the other day.
Garrick, if I could just throw one other thing on that whole gear
totally.
doesn't matter conversation. We talk about this on This Week in Photo a fair amount, with because it's, you know, photographers love talking about the latest and greatest gadget and what it can do and what it can't do. And what I've learned over the past decade or so is that, yeah, it doesn't matter. Gear doesn't, quote, matter. The story, like Doug was saying, the story and the audio and the production and all that stuff is what matters, even in still photography. But one thing that people often miss is the enjoyment of the process and the I don't know, the ease of use, that great gear makes getting from point A to point B. Like, you could cross the country in a covered wagon. Sure, you can absolutely do it. But wouldn't it be better in a Tesla, right? You can get there faster and in more comfort and and have more joy along the way. I think that's where these cameras like GH6 come in. Yeah, sure, you can do a lot of stuff with cameras from 15, 20 years ago and make award-winning movies, which have been made. But with a camera like this, you can do so much more faster and have much more fun and enjoyment doing it in the process. So I think that's one of those missing things that people leave out. Sure, you can get there, it's possible, but what about the process of getting there? Is it fun? Are you enjoying yourself? Do you dread taking that camera out of the bag, or is it you can't wait to take it out of the bag? Right.
I will just add one quick. It's funny. I switched to a GH4 a few years ago off of another camera. I will not say which one. And the difference was the usability. The difference was that I literally dreaded using the other camera.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. You gotta want to use it. You have to feel impassioned by the gear you're using. And I think we all can agree, everybody's making great cameras. It's really about which camera is right for you. And that's why we do these panels, is so that people can get the information and they don't have to dig through 30,000 YouTube channels and online reviews, and we can get to the heart of what the camera does and how does it make you not just a better creator, but how does it free your mind so that you don't have to do the work, that the camera takes care of all that for you and opens your mind up so you can just create. So want to thank you guys again. Obviously, a huge thank you to Panasonic for sponsoring this event. Matt, Doug, Frederick, You guys are great to have on. You guys make my job easy. I never do less talking than when I have you guys on. So that's always a good thing. So huge thank you to you guys, and huge thank you to all of our viewers out there. We love to see you guys engaged, getting your questions in. Frederick, you said you're going to have a review cooking for this thing once you get your hands on a little more. Where are we going to be able to take a look at that?
It's going to be at thisweekinphoto.com. That's my Rome, and all roads lead there.
Perfect. And if you guys would like to see Doug reprising his role as an English teacher, albeit, you know, I don't know, it was maybe Saved by the Bell vibes going on there with Doug, head over to our YouTube channel and you get to see Doug in the classroom schooling everybody on the Panasonic GH6. That's all we got for now. Another rendition of the B&H virtual event space. Expert panel is in the books. Catch y'all next time.